Chris Schmidt with the Average Joe Sports Show and plenty of recruiting to hit.
Gary Sharp, and it's College World Series time.
Hi, everybody. It's Bill Doleman. Can we get football season started already? And we'll certainly talk about the Huskers.
It's Elijah Herbel here. A historic night for some Husker pitchers. Matt Waldron, Spencer Schwellenbach, Cade Povich, all of them doing big things in the majors. We'll talk about that.
Welcome to it, episode 44 of the Average Joe Sports Show. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. One of these is not like the other in many regards, as it is the hat edition. Sharpie getting ready for that blessed sun as he's doing Westwood One coverage for the College World Series. Doleman is ready to go put more heat down at the track. Letting withdrawal from Saratoga. And Elijah, how is the gardening?
My flowers looked great this spring. Recently, not so much, but the lawn's looking all right.
Okay. All right.
Well played.
Or I'll call you Chi-Chi. I mean, it's good. It's good. Fellas, we're getting to it here. We're just whipping through the month of June. Big recruiting weekend on deck for Nebraska. Their second session of Friday Night Lights. We'll get there. Talk a little bit about the College World Series as the world of baseball descends onto Omaha. The Big 12, we got to start cashing some checks. Pretty awesome moment for a couple of former Huskers and Will Bolt TV last night in Baltimore. As always, can subscribe to the Average Joe Sports Show podcast. It's free for you. Like and subscribe. We'll take a rating, Spotify or iTunes. Give us a follow on Twitter at AJ Sports Pod. Find and watch the digital and should say the video version on YouTube of the Average Joe Sports Show. So let's get into it. Doleman, you've been on a roadie. Sharpie, you've had a little vacay. Let's talk summertime and what you guys have been up to. Elijah and I have been slaving away.
Well, wait a minute here. I didn't go on a vacay.
No?
No.
Staycay.
There you go. You could say a staycay.
Staycay.
It's good. I will say this, though. Like, there was points over the weekend where I was like, you know what? It's time for football.
Yeah, thank you.
It feels like it's time for football. I mean, college baseball season essentially over. You know, I mean, it's time for football.
Adrian Martinez gets the MVP and the UFL, you know, so Husker fans have another reason to be excited about football season. Look, I went up to Saratoga Springs for the Belmont. Now that the Belmont track in New York City is undergoing renovations, so they moved it to one of the most beautiful places on earth, that being upstate New York, which is also one of the most expensive places on earth. But I went up to the Belmont and came very close to a pick five, but Dornock beat our horse by a nose or a head or just too damn much anyway. And so I came back with a hat and a whole bunch of drink coasters that looked like losing tickets. Wow.
Well, Bill, it's funny. I'm hearing this story. Gary's talking about how it's ready for football season. You might not be, because that means you have to go back to teaching America's future broadcasters of the world. You're probably enjoying your summer vacation.
Yeah, that's not too bad either. You know, don't have to worry about the Connor Clarks of the world. But yeah, it's a little bit of a break for those of us in academia for the time being. But no, I agree with Gary. I mean, it's like okay. What's his name? Darius Luff, the hurdler from Nebraska, wins the national championship, crosses the finish line. All right, track season's done. When does fall camp start?
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't he be running right into Lincoln to start fall camp?
To your point, I know Schmidt said we've been slaving away. Not really. I mean, I've had a couple of lake days over the past couple of weeks. See some friends. What do they say? They're talking about UTEP. They're talking about Colorado. Like. Everyone's ready for football season. Everyone's ready to see if this Dylan Raiola hype train has any actual steam behind it. And I don't disagree with them. Like, I love summer. Don't get me wrong. 4th of July is going to be awesome. But, like, once the 4th of July hits and you make it through that weekend, then it's like, all right, let's zoom through a couple weeks. Let's get to Big Ten media days. Let's get to fall camp. Let's get to football. to me, summer pretty much ends with the 4th of July, because then you're into the dog days of July. When for me, I'm finishing up umpiring baseball, but still I'm looking ahead to football season. Once the 4th of July hits, like really, that's the date to me. That's like the 4th of July hits. I know it gets hot, especially in Nebraska. That's when you start getting the 104-degree days with 90% humidity, and it's awful. And those are the days when it's really like, can we just have football season already? So that's when summer to me ends, because that's when it becomes no more fun. That's when it's just like, all right, let's get to fall.
It's going to be great. And the topic of hype is, every year you get your hopes up if you're a Nebraska fan. It's okay, I think, this year. Can we say it's going to be different? It's going to be okay this year. Part of the reason you can feel a little bit better, A, the talent that you have at that quarterback spot in Dylan, but B, I think we'll start with this. I think Nebraska is going to manage the hype pretty well. I think Matt Rule will be great at that, not only with his high-level quarterback, but just in general with what they did and with what they can do. That's going to be part of this. That's going to be part of this, because if they do what they're supposed to do, in a lot of people's eyes and mind, they're supposed to start out, and then that thing's going to get real, real loud nationally, not just locally.
I agree. I mean, I think they're very, very confident that they're making the right strides to get to where they want to go, but they're not going to tell you about it, because they know once you start talking about it, people roll their eyes and go, yeah, right. So they know that they got to go out on the field. I think there's just a different vibe, and I think it starts from the top. He has delivered his message really well. So, everybody knows kind of where they stand, where they're going, what they see. And I mean, the also the part of this is Nebraska can't be 5-7 forever. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's also part of that you go, yeah, you know what? At some point, they need to start moving up. And for the first time in a while, this feels like there is movement, because there are now actions behind words.
Look, the hype train is real, because when you have the NAIA Offensive Player of the Year leaving his golf course job to come down to Lincoln for a tryout camp to be part of the Nebraska quarterback room, I mean, it is on, right? So if Jalen Gramstead is in, everybody's got to be in at this point.
I like the JUCO. They brought in as well. Don't forget the JUCO.
I know that Bryce Conover is a nice story, but I mean, look, Nebraska has not had a quality 5'10", 190-pound quarterback in a long time.
Joe Gans.
Joe wasn't a long time. I mean, Joe Gans is like 40 now.
Joe wasn't 190.
I don't think did Joe Gans throw for 6,000 yards in his career?
If they would have been smart enough to play him, he would have.
So I'm excited. I want to see. I want to see that kid in a Husker uniform. Let's bring him down. Look. It's kind of a feel good story of the summer. This postgraduate camp that they put together, and the JUCO look. But I'm charmed by the Gramstead story. I think that's kind of a fun thing, that Nebraska is going to add another body to the quarterback room just because. And here's a guy who wants to just, give it a shot. I like it.
It's a plan, right? It's a plan of, okay, say Dylan wins the job, and what's the value? The value of having Harburg help the offense, not be afraid to use him or play him at a skill spot, because, okay, if he's your number two, then what do? Well, you go get another quarterback that's competent, you like. You move Harburg to do what he can do on the field and use him as another weapon on offense. And then with Kalen, you can just get him developed. And it's not that you don't try and get to him to see those 4 redshirt games at some point, but it's planned out, Elijah.
And that's where I was going to go. Is I'm not convinced, even if you do bring in Gramstead, that he's going to be the first guy off the bench if you have a Dylan Riley injury. I think that's your insurance policy if you, God forbid, lose Dylan Riley to some sort of season-ending injury, because you look down the road here. I think there's a plan in place from Matt Rule that if Dylan plays 3 or if Dylan plays 4, you still with the red shirt year to get Daniel Kalen some development. you have that 1 to 2 years where you still have him towards the end of his career, should he stick around. I know in the portal area, you can't count your eggs before they're hatched, or you can't count your chickens before they're hatched while they're still just eggs. And I think that's what you might be looking at with the Daniel Kalen situation. Like, let's redshirt him now so you get 2 years from him down the road somewhere. Like, you can't do that. But at the same time, like, I think it would be nice from a Gramstad perspective, God forbid you lose Riley to a season-ending injury, you aren't forced to burn that Kalen redshirt. Because I'm with Schmidt. I think you want to allow Heinrich Haarberg to be a football player in whatever role that is. And if you need him to be your insurance policy, I think that you have to hold yourself back from allowing him to be a football player, to go do what he does best on the field. So, I mean, even if Riley gets hurt and he misses a half, I'm not convinced it wouldn't be Kalen or Haarberg coming off the bench. But I see Gramstad, should you bring him in, as being that potential insurance policy that, like, if the wheels fall off and you want to keep that red shirt because you're looking 3-4 years down the road, you're able to do so.
Here's the deal with Gramstad, and this is from a play-by-play announcer perspective. And Gary, back me up on this. He's the guy that you want to have that card in your folder of game stories, that you've got yourself a blowout, and that you can pull that card out and you begin the story with, here's a guy. And then you get to tell the story. He's working at a golf course. He comes down to the camp, and you get to tell the story in a 52-7 ball game. You get the ISO on him. You hope that he completes his first pass. Maybe he throws a touchdown pass late in the game. But Gramstad, that's the kind of guy that is a play-by-play announcer, you live for, just to deliver that story at just the right moment to make all your homework pay off.
I absolutely agree with that. And it's a good story. I mean, it's also, a kid that says, man, I grew up, I wanted to be a Husker. He played at a really good program. That's a program of winning. I think we have to slow our roll here a little bit. Yeah, Nebraska could use another body in that room, and he would be somebody that comes from a winning culture that is a little bit older, so maybe he can help. But NAIA football, I don't care how dominant Northwestern is, and they are, and they got a prolific offense. We're talking between Division II and Division III. So I know we're not saying, but people that are saying that, boy, he might come in. No, he would be an extra guy in that room. I also want to go back to something, because this will be very curious once fall camp begins. Heinrich Haarberg sees himself, guys, as a quarterback. Mm-hmm. I mean, he knows what he's up against, but he looked much different in the spring. The guy that's going to start at quarterback is already in Sharpie, but the guy that's going to play backup wants to be a quarterback. And I think they want him to be a quarterback. So Haarberg is one of the more interesting guys during camp, because I think I know what I'm getting with Raiola. Okay? I know you're the starter. I know what you can be. If you've seen him this summer, he's a little bit bigger. I would say he's probably about 240 pounds. I mean, his lower half is thick, but he looks good. You see him throwing in the stadium all the time with the wide receivers, and he spins it differently than we're used to. But that guy that is going to be the number 2 and wants to be the true number 2, not just because, that redshirt guy, Kalen's going to redshirt. I think Haarberg is poised to look different in 2024. And also, when they need him, get on the field. And he would like to be on the field first, ahead of playing some package type thing where he's playing tight end. And that's actually good for Nebraska, because that shows quarterback development. Not saying they wouldn't use him because he's a good enough athlete to find a place, but I think it's good to say that about Haarberg and not talk about, man, the guy wants to be a quarterback. You heard him after the spring game, and he is working to make sure that they keep him at quarterback, and whatever opportunity arises, he's ready for it, unlike last year.
Don't dismiss his development, his improvement to be the clear cut second option, versus take that away, right, and just exile him to an H-back.
Yeah, let me ask you guys this question. How many quarterbacks will have played for Nebraska? Everybody is healthy. How many quarterbacks will have played for Nebraska by the end of the Purdue game at the end of September?
My number would be 3. I'll jump in the water first.
3. I think 3 is it, because I think you can win by and cover. You can cover, which means you're going to get some of the backups on. Remember how that used to work?
Yeah, that what Bill was alluding to, when you pull out that card and it's 52-7. Yeah. It's a blowout, and here comes the Terminator. After Brooke,
Here's Frankie London. I mean, just go down the list.
But go ahead.
I don't think they're not going to go very, very deep. I hope that they don't do that. Play it like the NFL, where the starter gets every single snap, even into the game that's well in hand, win or lose. Right, the starter in the NFL, and Bill Callahan did that in Nebraska, where guys didn't even tape up for practice because they weren't going to play. So if you're going to have a quarterback like a Harburg, if he is your backup, he's got to get reps early. So I think that there's probably two, and if there's a third, it won't be Kalen.
So can I add something to that? And I know what you're saying, Bill, but Nebraska's going to start a guy that hasn't played college football, and I think he needs a lot of reps. And reps, if the game is in hand, you get him out because you don't want to get him injured. But I think Dylan Raiola needs to play football. He needs to play at the college level and play football because he's never played here before. And so maybe they go a little bit longer in some of these games where that's a healthy lead so that he just gets reps, game reps, not practice reps, but game reps. So that's why it's fascinating to me how they handle the first part of camp with the quarterback, how soon before they let it be known publicly who the starter is. And then if by chance they play themselves into options of multiple people playing at multiple positions, what do they do with the quarterback reps to keep guy fresh, guy learning the quarterback position, but most importantly, keep everybody healthy?
Well, that's why I said three. That's why I said three, because I look at it. I look at a game in UTEP and a game in northern Iowa that, again, you want to get Raiola reps, but you also look a little further on the bench and you need to get experience to your guys. I mean, it's going to be a slightly different offense for Harburg, most likely. A guy in Kalen need to get some reps too. Both those guys, I think, deserve to get on the football field in their own right because you might need them later this football season. And I don't see three quarterbacks playing in any given game, but I see three quarterbacks getting on the field by the end of Purdue because you understand while Raiola needs reps, I think you also need to get some game reps for Harburg, who's going to be running a slightly different offense, and Kalen, because practice reps are great for development, but you can't compare them to what you're going to get in the game. That's why I say three.
You're going to manage those 4 games for Kalen, right? Yeah. Before he has to declare a red shirt. So he might play early, play too early, and then save 2 for late in case there's an injury. Yep. He may not play all 4 games, but I think that he might play early. One thing you mentioned it, Gary, when are they going to announce a starter? I think that they have to do that fairly early after maybe the first or second scrimmage of camp. You cannot take that up to game week, and you certainly cannot take it up to kickoff. Like, who's it going to be? Who's going to be the first guy out there? And if they trot out Heinrich Harburg, there's going to be 95,000 people there who are anticipating that it being Dylan Raiola. Now, it could be a wonderful moment when Dylan takes the field, and that's as expected. But if they don't make an announcement, to me, 2 weeks before, or certainly at least no later than the week of game of the first press conference before the game, they cannot play games with that starting assignment. It's either got to be Dylan Raiola or Heinrich Harburg, and people who arrive in Lincoln on Thursday, Friday, Saturday have got to know and expect it. It cannot be a game time decision.
No,
I think Harburg. That would be chaos.
I mean, it's the elephant in the room. Everybody knows that Dylan is a starter. He's
right.
A starter on day number 1. It's in terms of your prep for the season. I think it's important early, and internally, maybe you don't really have to announce anything because everybody has been around these guys and they can go, yeah, that's the guy. But I say early to announce it, or maybe you don't tell us, or you just assume that everybody knows it's going to be Dylan. Because then you start putting in game plans, you start putting in prep, and you start doing things at game speed where you have a game mentality to start getting ready for the season and then ultimately for a game. And so that's where I think you need to narrow it down. It's one guy, and he's working with the number 1 offense. And you think about it, guys, there aren't really a lot of quote unquote jobs that are open. There might be some positions that are positioned by committee early, but in terms of like just mono-on-mono battle in fall camp, and we say, well, all positions are open, you want the competition, but we know how it works. There aren't a lot of positions that are open at Nebraska.
You're looking at, they're trying to solidify the guard spot, right? You got some candidates there. You feel like you know who your tackles are, you know who your center is. You got about 3 or 4 names at guard. You're working on that linebacker spot. Some guys that have played, but again, you lost a couple of key guys.
I mean, isn't the biggest position battle in all of fall camp will be the cornerback position opposite Tommy Hill?
Yeah, you're looking at whoever is going to be on that other side. That's big.
And to me, that battle comes down to, from what we've been hearing out of spring, probably the health of Bly Hill, right? Like, I think I wouldn't put him with pin. I probably wouldn't even put him with pencil, but I'd be looking at that to be the name if he's healthy, just based on what we heard out of spring ball and the fact that I know Ethan Nation was working a little further down the depth chart, but the fact that he's gone, I think, increases the odds of Bly Hill should he be healthy. If Bly Hill doesn't come into fall camp at 100% or close, that's whenever that conversation really starts ramping up to me about who's going to play that opposite corner spot. But for now, I look at it likely being Bly Hill.
I mean, there's Boodle and Charles, and then here's a guy who he's the poster child for a reclamation project and development. What does Evan Cooper do with Malcolm Hartzog?
Mm-hmm.
Does Malcolm Hartzog, who has ridden the roller coaster in his 2-year career at Nebraska, is Malcolm back to what he looked like as a freshman? And I think, they look at him differently than we do, because I think they internally know the challenges and kind of the yo-yo he's been on, safety, cornerback, and all of a sudden things are swirling and you get confused. Watch him early on in this season, what they do with him, and if he looks different from the last time we saw him, because he was on the struggle bus. I mean, there was no denying that. But in this case, Bly Hill and the unknown of when he'll be back, and I think it's later than sooner. I mean, they're going to need a guy like Malcolm Hartzog to be able to put in the minds of the coaches that they can trust him to throw him out there in key situations.
With Hartzog, he had a solid freshman season at the corner spot. It didn't go well at times last year for him there, but when we've talked about and his name's come up, it's been about being able to settle in and just kind of go to work at one spot versus hopping around, right? We've seen that in the past on the offensive line where guys get thrown in before they're ready, then they get hurt or they never settle. Well, it's kind of an example, not from an injury standpoint, but with Hartzog, good ball player, physical kid, really tremendous athlete. But yeah, I mean, that is a spot on the field that can really mess with your mind, especially in the corner, making a living that way. So some interesting stuff football-wise. Let's stay with football. Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. It's the Average Joe Sports Show podcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod, and get the audio portion of the show with Spotify and iTunes. Recruiting weekend, a number of folks going to be in Lincoln starting on the 14th, the Friday Night Lights, as we tape here on Thursday, and then the final run at some big fish on the 21st. But a couple of names, Gary, that I know you're familiar with at the linebacker spot. Christian Jones, his visit upcoming, and Merritt Dawson is also the linebacker that just took his trip down to Alabama, but it's been neck and neck with Nebraska. A couple of thoughts from you on these two linebackers.
Well, let me first ask you guys, because I thought this was interesting. And to me, Christian Jones is at the top of the list, him and Lofton, and they're coming up soon on their decisions. But Christian Jones from Westside, you don't have players that play that position in Nebraska very often. Like when a Nick Henrich came along in high school when he was healthy at Burke, he was like, whoa, guy that can cover in space. Not necessarily rush the passer, but cover in space and do it with a lot of great football IQ and speed. And that's where I see Christian Jones. So I think he is a priority. But as you mentioned, Smitty, he just went to Auburn. Here's one thing I thought was kind of interesting. Elon has told all of us that we can't see everybody's likes on X anymore. They've gone private. So Matt Rule says, I won't like it. I'm going to repost Christian Jones' visit to Auburn. So, when every player goes to a school and they pose with the coach or their mom or their dad and, they got the uniform on. So typical stock picture. Christian Jones does that. Matt Rule reposted it, which I thought was interesting because I don't recall. It's not the first time he's done it. Not necessarily Christian Jones, but other recruits that Nebraska's in on. I don't recall any other Power 4 football coach that would do that. I thought that was kind of interesting. So does that mean, hey, I want you, or we have a good relationship, or let people know, hey, we got to step up for this guy when he's on campus? I don't know. I just found that very, very interesting.
That is quite intriguing. I think it's the step-up card, don't you?
I mean, does he have to call and say, hey, 1890, you guys want to keep a kid from West Side here, a legacy?
Yeah. And while you're at it, the tight end, too, that just told the world that Florida State raised the bar in Lofton when he was down there last weekend.
Could this also be a case of Matt Rule? And I agree with you. I think there's probably the case of, hey, Husker fans, like, we like this guy. He's at Auburn this week. How does that make you feel?
It's the offering plate. Pass the offering plate.
But I'll also say, I think there's also the element. Matt Rule's preached authenticity a lot. And I think how that could come off to an athlete, say, like, I was never a good enough athlete to be getting retweeted by Power 4 head coaches. But how that could also come off to an athlete is a guy being like, hey, I'm proud of you for going and taking your visits and trying to find the place that's best for you. Matt Rule's preached that for a long time. Like, we want Nebraska to be the best place for you. But at the end of the day, like, you as an athlete, we think it's important that you pick the place that is going to be best for your development. And I think there could be a little bit of that. I'm with you. It's mostly the, hey, step it up a little bit. But I think there's also that element, back pocket, that you're sitting to recruit. Like, hey, you're off at Auburn. I'm not going to be offended. It's good to see you down at Auburn exploring your options and saying, hey, go find the place that's best for you. I think there's a little bit of that in there as well.
My question is, why didn't they have the Nebraska football semi-tractor trailer make the trip down to Auburn and stalk him there? Just follow him out to USC and follow him to Oklahoma, you know?
Well, you know what? I gotta drive over to 87 the Pacific in Omaha to see if they brought the semi to West Side.
Yeah, I think that's the next step for Nebraska is just start stalking recruits with the truck.
They're a summer too late. They could have parked the semi when a certain relative was on the mound there and saved a lot of us some problems. They should have parked the semi during some of those West Side tournaments last year. Baseball is where I'm getting at.
Well, every offseason, there's flight tracker season. Here in Husker Nation, we're going to start going semi-tracker.
Hey, look, it worked. It worked to get Grant Bricks, which, by the way, Grant Bricks, who, you know, we got to see him in the spring, and his body is starting to transform. Kudos, little love to Grant Bricks, because back in his hometown, well, actually in Missouri, it was a Mexican restaurant in Missouri Valley, he set the record for the most tacos eaten. He ate 21 tacos in one setting. So we're back, baby. Offensive linemen are breaking food records.
Get 3 Modelo's in me. 21 tacos, I think I can do it.
Now I investigated. These are real, like, these are large tacos.
Oh, they're not like the little mini street tacos?
No.
Now I don't know. I can't take down 9 hot dogs and 9 I don't know about 21 tacos. I was going to say, like, the Goldilocks zone after a couple Modelo's, you can really lock in and start putting them away. But if they're full size, like big, 21's a lot. That's impressive.
We don't want the nutritionists listen to this, but Bill will get this reference. So when the Wiegerts were playing at Nebraska and they would go home to visit the family up in Fremont, Zach and Eric both told me that they would get Domino's pizzas, maybe 3 large Domino's pizzas, and they would get them and they'd put them in the front seat of the car. And by the time they got from Lincoln to Fremont, those pizzas were gone.
That is awesome.
Hey, Nebraska was pretty good on the offensive line back in the days of the Wiegerts.
Oh, and if there were only NIL deals for Domino's with the pipeline.
That reminds me of anyone who has been around Lincoln High School football for a while will know Coach Butler, Ted Butler from Southeast mainstay. He told me that back in the day in his football playing days, I believe it was at Wesleyan, they would go to the original Valentino's location, and they'd order personal large pies, the linemen, and they'd take the little butter packets, and they would just put them all over the pizza and let the butter inside melt, and then they would open up the butter packets and drench the large pizzas in these butter packets, and that was their method to keep their weight up during fall camp as linemen. It was like they didn't want to get too light, so they just drenched their pizza in extra butter, and they said it's the best way you can eat a pizza. They're like, don't recommend it, don't do it, awful for your arteries, but it's delicious. And I never tried it, but
melted butter. What's your topping?
Well,
give me pepperoni, give me black olive, and melted butter.
Isn't that what Papa John's does?
It's they're a garlic sauce.
Okay. I'm not a Papa John's person.
Domino's does the garlic butter on the crust, which
fancy.
When they first introduced that was game changing.
Fancy.
I mean, when we start crushing Pizza Ranch and those kind of things, we are back, baby.
So when is Christian Jones making his visit to Nebraska? Is it the last act of the tour? Because we know this. Just because somebody commits to a school during the summer, it's entirely possible that they could be convinced that maybe they should stay or go to a different school, perhaps closer to home, or one where the heartstrings are maybe a little bit stronger. So maybe he or anybody else, Merritt Dawson's, is enamored with Alabama or Auburn or USC. But, we might get down to, December or something, and minds can change. It's happened before, I'm saying.
So he's here this weekend, and then he goes to Oklahoma next weekend. And that doesn't mean that when he's done at Oklahoma, he's going to make his announcement.
Right. And it doesn't mean that if he makes his announcement that it's binding until he signs on a dotted line, whichever dotted line that might be. That could always change right up until the last minute.
Yep.
Just ask Kirby Smart.
Yeah. Nope. And Ohio State as well. Right. I mean, plenty of time. Dawson Merritt, the linebacker, super talented, had his official visit to Lincoln already, had his official visit to Alabama. Nebraska could be sitting fabulously if they get both. Jalen Williams, a high-profile defensive lineman that went to Michigan last weekend. Nebraska was supposed to see him later this summer. That didn't happen. He committed to Michigan. But I think Nebraska will give the appropriate amount of space. But to your point, Bill, I think there's probably, guys that commit elsewhere. Nebraska will not ever burn a bridge. The kid changes his mind late in the recruiting process. Nebraska, I think, will be right there. And if in this portal era there's something that ain't going right, Nebraska's probably, an option maybe to come back to as well, although that's not necessarily smiled upon. So
can I ask the question with Merritt? Because I think right now, if you flip a coin between Alabama and Nebraska, you probably just have the exact same chance as me of predicting where he's going to go. But do you think the longer that this drags on post Alabama visit, is that good or bad for Nebraska?
Good.
The longer it takes him to make a decision on where he's going after the Bama visit is great. Totally.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well, because I'm kind of counting days with this one and seeing, like, is a decision coming today? Is a decision coming today? And the longer it goes, the better I feel. But I couldn't predict it either way right now. I mean, it's Nebraska v. Bama.
Well, and I think, and I've thought this for a while, because I think Nebraska does, because they built up a relationship. I mean, Alabama made up some ground when he went to visit Alabama. I would have said 2 weeks ago it's a slam dunk. He's going to come to Nebraska. But I'm with you, Elijah. I think it's a flip of a coin right now. But he was at Alabama last weekend, so now we're about a week out, and he hasn't done anything. So, that's still good for Nebraska. I know that he'd be a huge pickup. If you could combo him with Jones, and those are your two linebackers in this class, and your two tight ends are Bear Tenney and Lofton, I think you'd feel really good about both of those position groups. And then you start, you work on a couple of other areas where you need some depth along the defensive line, and you can't have enough offensive line, in my opinion.
Sharpie, what do you think of Nebraska's inroads into Bishop Gorman? Utu was in last week, really high-level guy. They love him on the interior, can also play tackle, but he's somebody that is considering Nebraska, but there's some other winning programs that might be higher on his list. You've got a couple of other kids, though, that Coach Donnie's tight with out there at Bishop Gorman, knows their line coach. That could be something that subtly explodes for Nebraska in future years, is Nebraska and their ability to get linemen from Bishop Gorman or get higher ranked or win some of those recruiting battles against the Alabamas of the world or the Oklahomas of the world, or think about places that Oregons of the world that have good line play.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think we really need to look at Donnie and go, man, there's a guy that you wondered in his first year if he could ever recruit. You're doing a hell of a job recruiting. I mean, he's a guy that his stock is really rising, whether it be with the current guys or on the road recruiting. Just look at some of the pickups he's had. I think this is one thing that's changed about Nebraska in recruiting. And, they're good in relationships. They're very authentic. They're very aggressive. They're very well organized, but they're also very smart. If you're, let's say, for example, they've already got into Omaha West Side. So they've got current players on the roster from Omaha West Side. You've identified that's already going to be a good program. With Paul Lamanji as the head coach, they're not going to take a step back. So they're going to give you a handful of D1 guys every year. And if you start a relationship and get one, and they come to your school and they play well and they have a good experience, not only are you recruiting the next one, that player is helping you recruit as well. That's kind of how Nebraska's had a philosophy in Florida. Some of these high schools they've gone back to. If a Florida kid comes all the way to Lincoln and has a good experience and plays, Nebraska has a good word on the street. And then that player also is recruiting for you. So Bishop Gorman in Vegas, which, perennially is a great athletic program top to bottom, if you can get your foot in the door and start one player and then another player, that would be ideal, because that's a program that wins at a high level and they produce double-figure Division I guys every year.
No,
it's one of the best high school, sports factories, certainly out west. I haven't spent a lot of time in the Mountain West Conference and just seen where athletes were going back in the day. Modern day out in California. Remember when they won like 112 games in a row? Perennial power. Bishop Gorman is that in the Rocky Mountain West in terms of how many they produce. The year, just going to basketball, the year Shabazz Muhammad was the number one recruit in the country in basketball. They had 5 D1 recruits starting, in their lineup. They could have just taken that Bishop Gorman team and put it at UNLV, and they probably would have been, similar to the Larry Johnson running Rebels, but all those guys dispersed.
No hot tubs.
Well, they would have found them if they needed them. But that's a factory. And for Nebraska to make inroads already, with the guy that got to walk on, his name's escaping me. And but that was a big get, not just because they got a good player, but because they knocked down the door.
Well, wasn't Tyjon Lindsey a Bishop Gorman?
Yep.
Guy?
No, he was Calabrasca.
There was one of the guys in that recruiting class was Bishop Gorman. I thought it was it Tyjon Lindsey was spent his underclassmen years and then transferred over to Calabasas to go play with Jebbia.
That sounds right. Between Gorman and
you're right. He was a Bishop Gorman guy,
but that's a lifetime ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair.
He turned out pretty good. Do you know he's playing in the CFL now?
Good for him.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'll never forget everyone being excited for him. And then there was a moment whenever Ohio State came to Lincoln and didn't punt once, where he caught this little 5-yard out route. And I can't remember which future NFL defensive back it was for Ohio State. Absolutely destroyed him on the sideline. And that was one of those things where I went, ooh, there's levels to this, isn't there?
Probably Akuda, and then the old Michigan punt return. Well,
you think about, hey, so that class a little different here. That was that was one of Riley's last recruiting classes. That was heavy California, because Jebbia was in there, Lindsey was in there, Avery Roberts, who was not a California kid, he was an East Coast kid, was in there. That was Key Jr. was in there. They had Hymas was in that class. I mean, that was a pretty good class. The problem is that, and Austin Allen was in that class, is a lot of those guys didn't last very long in Lincoln. They were here for a cup of coffee and they were gone. And you remember how much we got excited because they waited on Elijah Blades. And he was going to be a difference maker out of Pasadena at cornerback and never made it here.
Yeah. They beat Florida for him, and it never materialized.
And I had I had a friend who was in close with Elijah Blades. He was doing like recruiting graphics for him and whatnot throughout the recruiting process, and said he was just a head case. That's a long story. I don't want to expose my buddy for that, but yeah, he said Elijah Blades was just an absolute nightmare to work for.
I'm going through the 2017 class. You can count on one hand, I think, guys that finished their career at Nebraska. Yeah.
Hymas, Austin Allen, who else?
Was Stilly in that class?
He was not. Didn't Damian Daniels finish his career
Yeah,
here.
Damian had a good, snacks. Good.
Well,
good
you could also talk about that coaching staff not finishing its career at Nebraska either. So therein lies part of the problem.
Man,
Well,
guys,
it all ties into retention is key. I mean, Nebraska is always able to recruit. Any perceived excuses are starting to go away with the new facilities and better organization in that department. But Nebraska has always been a top 25 recruiting program, 15 to 25. The next step is, can you get inside of 15? It's all about retention. Not everybody's going to stay together throughout, from class to class, moving year by year. But man, that's an area where Nebraska has not only lost a guy or two, they've lost 9, 10, 11, 12 before they even make it to their junior year.
it's too many. Can't do it. And we'll see if the fortunes shift. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. It's the Average Joe Sports Show podcast, episode 44. Find us on YouTube, the Average Joe Sports Show, the AJ Sports Pod. Follow on Twitter, and like and subscribe to iTunes and Spotify. Fellas, let's talk a little college baseball. Sharpie, you're going to be on the call for Westwood One and the world of college baseball, the ACC, and the SEC Invitational is making its way. That gets underway. You got to be pretty fired up. You've got the hat for it if you're in the booth or out in the sun. But what's this mean? You've seen and covered the CWS for a lot of years. Bill, you've been a part of it too with coverage. And Elijah and I, you and I will be up in Omaha for it as well. And you know what? Pretty good showcase for Nebraska.
It's great for Omaha. I mean, I call it the State Fair of Omaha. I think here's the thing. Like, college baseball is in a really good spot. The talent is really good because the draft, finally, a couple of years into the shortened draft, it's benefiting college baseball. There is more of an investment in college baseball, from facilities to coaching staffs. I mean, you're going to have 13 guys in the SEC next year that make $1 million or more as the head coach. You already know that there's a lot of SEC programs that draw more than either the Oakland A's, I know that's not hard, or some AAA teams. So there's more of an investment in college baseball. The ratings are up. There is also the investment in strength and conditioning. So you see guys that look like they should be playing football, not baseball. On the field, it is a great, great spot right now. And I think this might be a little bit of an anomaly because we've had Notre Dame and Oral Roberts in the last 2 years, but college baseball is in the South. 7 of the 8 teams are in a 800-mile radius, and then there's the Atlanta Braves. So it is very much a geographical sport, but it's a great field. This is a really, really good field for the College World Series, but it does show you that if you're, like, from Nebraska's perspective, you're in that second tier in the Big Ten, where you can go to South Dakota State and grab a Cale Frost, who was the Offensive Player of the Year in the league this past year, but Tennessee, Texas A&M are going to come to your program and grab your players. But, and that's a back and forth of coaches on how they construct their roster. But I think the sport's in a really, really good spot, and it's a really good field of 8 that are going to be here starting on Friday.
I was always amazed by many, many years ago when Rosenblatt Stadium would continue to make improvements because they wanted to make sure that the College World Series never left Omaha. And I remember talking to, I believe it was David Burst of the NCAA at the time. He was kind of an enforcement guy, but it seems to me that was the name that stands out. And there was always this fear in Omaha, and maybe it's still there to a certain degree, but a little more healthy, that Omaha is going to lose the College World Series. And they had to make improvements to Rosenblatt. They had to put in that Stadium View Club. They had to put in the best turf possible, the best seats possible, because they were afraid they were going to lose it. And I said, what's the danger of the College World Series leaving Omaha? Because there was talk about, well, they'll play it in Chicago and half the field will be at Wrigley and half the field will be at Comiskey, and then they'll determine the champion. Or it could go to Minnesota to the Homer Dome. And he's like, I don't know. There's really not a lot of big fight for this thing. And it was kind of a candid conversation that Omaha there's just paranoia. but that was 30 plus years ago. And now you look at you're right, Gary, the game is so healthy. ESPN has done, for all of its failings, I think with ESPN to a certain extent, they had a mission to promote college baseball through the CWS as its vehicle. And then from that, build out the regular season schedule. They've got more news outlets or network outlets. They've got streaming and all that. The game is really healthy in terms of exposure, to where I think you've got players like Paul Skeens a year ago was a household name for sports fans, even casual baseball fans. Yeah. People knew the name Paul Skeens, maybe not like they knew Caitlin Clark in women's basketball this year, but there are some players who are becoming somewhat stars, if you will, in the college game. You don't see that so much with like college basketball, because so many players are one and done and gone, and they're drafting, you never hear from them again, or they go overseas and play. But you're having some players with some longevity and familiarity that I credit ESPN for growing the game, and for Omaha investing the way it has. I don't think they could ever wrestle it away from the city, no matter how long the lease is and how long the contract is.
Well, it's great for the game, but think about me, Bill. It's bad for me trying to go up to a weekend game at the Chuck, and I got to pay $45 for outfield seats. Maybe we should shrink.
I don't want to hear you whine. You've got a booze-filled tailgate you're going to first. It'll be okay.
You may not even make it to your seats.
There's going to be beautiful people all over. You'll be good. You're just going to take one on the chin for the seat.
Fine.
But yeah, I don't. That is a little sticker shock compared to the old GA price tag, waiting in line 7 miles deep, trying to get into the outfield.
I was amazed at the geometric parking capabilities of people around Rosenblatt. And that has been lost. That's a lost art with the downtown ballpark. The fact that you could have a postage stamp house with an even smaller yard and somehow jam 15 LeSabres in there and $100 a pop across the street, that lost art will never return. But nevertheless, good on those folks who made, Rosenblatt, the CWS, what it was. And congratulations to those who have made it what it is today.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I've heard less about, hey, I miss Rosenblatt this year, because was it 14 years, I think, now that we've been downtown. Rosenblatt was local feel. The downtown day trader is a corporate feel. It's changed, and there's going to be a generation that kind of gets, muscled out of the College World Series. The College World Series has become what the NCAA championships have become. It's expensive. The postseason is not for us regular fans. Us average Joes on this show, the postseason in sports, professional college, isn't for us. Okay, it is for people that have a lot more expendable income than we do. But I'll be interested to follow, because this is such a great event here in Omaha, and nobody else in the country can do what Omaha does year round. The volunteers, the paid people, to make sure that this thing comes off without a hitch. The contract is up in 2035. No one has any idea what college athletics are going to look like in 2035. So how does that affect a tournament like the College World Series?
That is the $1 million question. You want to keep it in Omaha?
$100 million question.
Yeah, that's a better term. But yeah, because you're going to have athletes on some sort of payroll. They're not going to be amateur anymore. So then what?
Hey, look, if you're the NCAA, and, I would be going to Omaha saying, what do we need to do to keep it here, as opposed to the other way around? Because you do not want to make the mistake that the NCAA did, and it certainly is on a much, much smaller scale than college baseball. But you go back to the mid-1980s, and men's gymnastics was held its national championships typically almost on an annual basis at the Bob Devaney Sports Center. Mm-hmm. And this is on the cusp of Phil Cahoy, Jim Hartong, Scott Johnson. Those teams won a national championships. Steve Elliott and Francis Allen was a character and pretty well known, and there were nightly during the NCAA men's gymnastics championships, 10 to 15,000 people there. And it was electric. It was an incredible environment. And they had great teams. You had more teams, Arizona State and UCLA and Iowa, Penn State, all that. And they decided a little bit too much of a home court advantage for Nebraska. Let's move it. And they moved it to Pauley Pavilion. at UCLA, like 86, 87, somewhere in there. And there were like 200-300 people there.
Ooh.
Shot the sport in the head right then and there. It has never been the same. The sport has never been the same since they moved it out of Lincoln and decided we need to move this around because, well, it's going to be more fair. Instead of leaving it at a place that loved it, like Omaha loves the CWS. You move the CWS out of Omaha, and it might be a charming, deal in LA or Vegas or wherever for a year. But after that, you'll be fighting to have the kind of charm. Even though it's corporate now, there's still a charm to the College World Series, and it has its place in Omaha. And if they were to ever move it, they would do irreparable harm to college baseball. Same with if they took the college softball tournament out of Oklahoma City.
Yep.
Guys, we'll wind it down. We'll wrap up. Pretty good moment this week for Nebraska baseball with Will Bolt on the broadcast of the Baltimore Orioles game. This was Wednesday night. You had Povich versus Schwellenbach, and what a showcase for Nebraska. And Will was able to be on hand for it. And that is something that I know Nebraska baseball fans, Sharpie, have been smiling about most of this week, and kind of a dream scenario for Big Red baseball fans.
Hey, it's I said on my show, I think it's probably in Will Bolt's Husker career. It's got to be in his top 5. It might be the 5th biggest thing that's ever happened. But how cool was Wednesday night at Camden Yards? I mean, that was just really cool. And then it was not just 2 pitchers; it was a third. And then you have a former Husker who's a hitting coach. I mean, it's been a good run for Nebraska baseball when it comes to pro guys, because look at Matt Waldron. Patrick Mahomes shouted out Matt Waldron. What world are we living in? What is going on here? So yeah, it was really, really cool. I'll tell you, Cade and Schwellenbach is in the right organization to help him. Cade Povich as well, because the Braves and the Orioles are good at developing young arms. Man, Cade Povich has the early look of a guy that could pitch in professional baseball, either as a starter or a middle reliever for a long time.
That's great.
I mean, I think, 3 guys. Matt Waldron, one of the most fun pitchers to watch in baseball. I don't want him to get lost in this conversation because I know Povich and Schwellenbach get all the headlines. I think in his last 5 starts, he has 7 total earned runs against him.
That's wild.
A sub-1 whip, 30-something strikeouts in those appearances. He is, I mean, at least among Husker circles, really, really quietly making a name for himself and working his way up in the Padres order. Schwellenbach and Povich obviously going to get the name appeal, then being the rookies and then being more recent in memory. But Matt Waldron's really quietly putting together a very, very solid year that could show, he could have longevity as a knuckleball. I know knuckleballers kind of have that stigma about them of being guys, well, they're a little bit out there. They're weird. They're not true MLB pitchers. Matt Waldron's got a 5-pitch mix. He gets strikeouts with the knuckleball. He's a different type of knuckleballer than we've ever seen. He can be one of those guys that we're still talking about 20 years from now because of how different he is on the mound.
Hey, Schwellenbach's in his 3rd year in pro ball? Is that right? Was he drafted in 21? I mean, yeah. I'm impressed because he was a shortstop in Nebraska as well as pitched. Yeah. The fact that in that amount of time that he's gone from being kind of a 2-way player, would he be drafted as a shortstop? The Braves liked him as a pitcher. But for him to make that move, I think quickly to be what appears to look, we don't know if he's going to be a long-term quality starter in Major League Baseball, but for him to make the move from a 2-way guy to being a Major League starter in 3 years, I think that's a great story.
And let's not forget, he missed his first year of professional baseball. I'm pretty sure it was Tommy John surgery. He missed the first year after he got drafted. So this is truly his 2nd full season of pro baseball.
He got drafted by the absolute right organization for him. And that is so critical for so many players. Did you get in the right system? Some guys are drafted by a big name organization and it ain't going to work out. But you get drafted in the right place that will develop you the right way. And I remember when he got picked, we talked to some people from the Braves organization. They had a plan for him. This is where they wanted him to be. And I'd forgotten about the surgery, but I think in 3 short years to go from a 2-way guy to a starter in Major League Baseball, to me, that's meteoric, right? But maybe some other people are like, oh, yeah, that's, Paul Skeens did it in less than a year. Well, that's Paul Skeens.
It's Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Thanks for spending time with us on the Average Joe Sports Show podcast. Again, YouTube, the Average Joe Sports Show, the AJ Sports Pod. Follow and like Twitter and YouTube, Spotify, and, of course, Google Play, where you can download it as all. Sharpie, have a great call on Westwood 1. And Bill, enjoy the Dirty South, my friend. Elijah will get you a new hat for next week, and I'll try and find a bigger rimmed lid. So we'll talk to you again with the Average Joe Sports Show. Thanks.